Welcome back to Kintsugi Heroes, helping people tell the stories they need to share so you can find the stories that you need to hear. In this episode, John Millam is joined by Scott Baker, a self-described content alchemist and man of many talents. From dreaming big as a child to navigating an unexpected journey, Scott's story is both inspiring and deeply human. He reflects on formative moments in his life, including influences from mentors, personal struggles, and the weight of childhood trauma that shaped his path. Through resilience and self-awareness, Scott found ways to cope and grow, embracing therapy, meaningful connections, and even the potential of AI to help him heal and evolve. Join us as Scott shares the challenges and triumphs that have defined his life and work. Enjoy this conversation with Scott Baker.
So welcome to the Kintsugi Heroes listeners to another Kintsugi Heroes Stories That Matter, and a conversation today with a man who is, in many ways, someone so interesting from a work point of view, because he's a self-described content alchemist, which I love, right? Which is on the thing, but also, of course, you're never just what you do; you are who you are in the sum of your life. And Scott has some amazing achievements and a beautiful family and a series of life events to share with us that shaped him and created who he is and how he engages with the world, which is what we're going to talk about today. So, Scott Baker, welcome to Kintsugi Heroes Stories That Matter. Thank you for coming along, mate.
Well, thanks for having me, John. It's great to be here. And when you hear someone introduce you like that, it's like, who are you talking about? But yeah, appreciate that.
I love that idea, and maybe we can start with that idea, because I believe identity is at the core of every man's journey through life. The closer he is, and the more certain about who he is and where he is, the more confident he is going someplace. Who are you, Scott? And how did you get to where you are now, if you do know where you are now? What was the journey, Scott? We love the word journey. What was little Scott's thoughts about where he was going and where he wanted to be, and how close is that?
Well, that's really a confronting question right now, to be fair. Like, literally been thinking about that a lot these last few weeks and exploring some of those things. So I would say I feel like I've had a few visits with my little Scott going, hey, thanks for doing what you did and all that type of stuff. And a bit of I suppose, maybe a form of healing type of approach. And I think there's been some apologies to the young fella too when I was young, saying, hey, I thought things would be slightly better than they are now, and would be I'd be in a better space right now. In terms of things that I had achieved, but in fairness, maybe I'm in exactly where I need to be, because I'm being maybe a bit harsh on myself or other bits and pieces. But as a little kid, I'd expected that I was going to take on the world, and I was a big dreamer. I wanted to be a doctor when I was younger, and so I thought about that all the time. Really had this strong emphasis of wanting to. I remember watching like 60-minute shows and getting really upset at kids that had either had cancer, had passed away, or things like that. And I was like, geez, there's got to be something that can change that. And I think that's kind of stuck with me, but I didn't end up going into the medical space because I was told to change my academics because I wasn't smart enough. I was super keen to learn, but I was on the spectrum back in the day, which wasn't as known as well as it is now. And while I was fascinated with learning, it had to be something I was interested in. But a lot of that fascinating. I don't think I read many books at school, but I read hundreds of books since school, and it was kind of weird. I did more reading after school. But I was very fortunate in my schooling. My parents wanted me to be a plumber, and they said, we're going to take you out to private school and put you in another school. And then my principal from a school found out that they'd taken me out, and they said, look, we can't afford it either. So he gave me a full scholarship, let's say I remember anyway, to go back to the school. And it was kind of one of those, I had a soccer coach and my principal that seemed, there were those two kind of men outside my life who had a huge impact on that belief in me that I think I was seeking and looking for some, and so they had some really big impacts on me.
Wow, mate, there's a lot in that. Just to unpack a little bit. First of all, I love that idea of the outside influences, right? Good men in your life, right? So often that's a pivotal experience for young blokes. Certainly in my case, right? Some of the external men say, I would describe them as saving me, right? Is that, what was missing at home that these guys added to, or, maybe not missing, but, what wasn't, what was?
I don't know if it was necessarily missing as much as, look, my dad worked really hard. So he worked 7 days a week and was very committed to providing for the family. So his way of showing his love and affection was to work really hard. And so I was very fortunate to grow up. So my dad's best mate lived next door to him when they were growing up, and they did everything together. And my dad went on a date with my mum, and my mum had a sister like a year younger. And so on my dad's first date, is how I remember it, my dad took my uncle to the date and said, hey, can he hang out with your sister? Anyhow, they got married. So two best friends married two sisters who were best friends. And then they were super close. And so they bought a house and land together, built this massive house. And our family lived on one side and my auntie and uncle lived on the other. We had this big games room in the middle, and I don't know any difference. So it was like a live-in. My auntie and uncle were amazing. I'm still very close to them now, and they had two kids, and so it was there was always people around, and so there was my auntie and uncle, and then there was their friends, and so it was a very sociable atmosphere. So there was a lot of men that would come into the house that were quite strong, and so it was almost like that was their obligation necessarily. And I don't say that they were doing it as an obligation.
No, but that's what how you perceived it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when these people who were outside of that framework, it was almost like my influence was having I felt like it was me that was being influenced and they were influencing me, as opposed to the others who may have done it for all the right reasons, but just wasn't as, I suspect it was probably just a validation of an external role model. It's like, if I can make it here, then I can make it in those areas as well.
Really, it's such an interesting framework to look at now as you look back, which is, again, also interesting that you're sort of reviewing it. When you look back, you mentioned almost apologizing to little Scott, right? Was that about, the dreams that he had and the vision? Were you apologizing for not executing that, like for those dreams not coming true?
I think it was more, you're getting onto some good points pretty quick here. Or when I say good, I mean impactful. I would say there was a part of me that felt like an element of like maybe letting him down, or that I wanted some of his naivety of dreams that things would be okay, and that just because life had dealt certain hands, that didn't mean you are the outcome. Like it's just because things haven't turned out the way you anticipated them to be doesn't mean you're maybe a lesser person than you thought you would if you'd achieved them. And so yeah, but it's a great question, which I suspect you probably maybe ask people, but I've literally been working through that just in the last few weeks. So, yeah.
There's a protocol called Internal Family Systems, IFS, which sort of involves talking to our parts, right? Our younger selves, the voice, and so on. And and just reminding them, welcoming them back into an integrated whole, because the role they play or the voices they offer were about getting through what you all have already survived, right? So,
yeah, and it's actually a very good way to describe it. And I think the value for me too was to go back and say, and to be very grateful for doing what, because there was a time when I was quite young that there was a major tragedy in the home, and at the time I thought I had been the contributor of that tragedy. And then when it was when I found out years later that not only was I not the contributor of the tragedy, I was only a participant in a circumstance that was beyond the 4-year-old's comprehension. So it certainly helped go, okay, well, I wasn't the responsible. Like my mum had lost a child at hospital, and she'd come home from hospital, and I recall opening the gate. She'd bred some dogs, and we'd had this big litter, and that the last one had been sold, and we only had the mother. And when she came home from hospital, I was so excited. I hadn't seen her for a while, didn't know why. Opened up the gate. The dog ran out, got killed by a car as she was getting out of a car coming from the hospital. And she was a massive dog lover. But then when she grieved for, I can't remember, it seemed like a really long time. I thought it was from losing the pet. And that I'd let the dog out. I found out later that it was my uncle. I just happened to be there at the moment of all of it taking place. So yeah.
My goodness, that's a complex way to carry a lot of weight as a young person, isn't it? Right? Isn't it?
Yeah, especially the relief when I was doing that part. And when it was brought to my attention that I wasn't, or the little fellow wasn't responsible, it was like. There was times when I would be distressed and fall back into that spot behind the chair, like as an adult, and figure it out. And I haven't been back there since I kind of resolved that. So there was obviously some things there that needed to.
Yeah, tremendous. That sense of reflection and to open up something so that you'd endured for so long and probably had a pretty significant impact on things, right? And then yeah,
well, especially one thing was, when my pets would pass away, the grief seemed to be more extreme maybe than maybe some others. And I would always get so, like when someone else's pet would pass, I would try to be very comforting for them, because I had experienced what I thought was extreme trauma from losing a pet, which I think it's been very helpful in dealing with other traumas, other deaths when going through and that type of stuff. I definitely know it has, because it's been a part of stuff. So
it's amazing web. We're always weaving events and activities. So of course, say trauma and the impact that can have around your relationships or the way you engage with the world in certain circumstances. There can also be positive ripples, right? So, you had no lack of achievement as a young person, and sort of, so maybe your dream at one point was changed, but, just so you were a world champion fisherman, right? So, like, that not everyone can say that. Tell us about that. How on earth do you get from, that kind of childhood to,
Well, interesting. They're kind of related in a little way. My grandparents used to fish. 6 days out of 7, they lived up at a place called Raymond Island, and they used to fish for bream. And I used to love going up there on the holidays. So I just loved fishing. And then I remember seeing a video. It was something on Channel 9 about this fishing tournament show, and I went, "Oh, I want to do that one day." So I went to the tackle shop, and then I bought the book that went with it. And they said, "Have you ever caught a bream on a lure?" And I went, "Nah, it can't be that hard. Like, I've caught them on bait." And so from that point on, I just went, well, I'm just going to go on this. I'm going to get on this show type thing. That was the start of it. And then, interestingly, 10 years later, I'd won a world title in kayak fishing. And because I was the world title, I got to go on that exact show on the 10th anniversary. So that was pretty cool. And it wasn't, to any of my mates that are listening, I won the world title, certainly not because I was the best fisherman. in the 100, and so there was we had 2 competitions running at once, but we had people from around the world fishing in this tournament, and I was kind of the last Australian picked. And but they had this briefing for the tournament, and they said, come down here and we'll get all the locals to tell you where to fish and what to do. And I went, well, I can't win it. I'll just turn up. I'll listen to what they have to say, and I'll just listen to them verbatim. I won't even question it, because sometimes we can kind of, well, I know I get caught up in, well, I think, yeah, that's the expert. I think I know better. I'm going to do it my way. Well, I just went, I can't win, and I'm not going to win. So I'm just going to do it exactly how they say it, to the point of they were doing things I would never have done, which was using lures in a particular way. And as soon as I started doing it, I just started catching all these fish, and lots of them. And I went, hey, this is pretty cool. And then at the end of it, I ended up winning by, say, 60 grams over the 3 days. And so, yeah, I believe I was good enough to be there, but I was fortunate enough to listen to the advice of the experts. But there were some far greater anglers on the day.
What a great lesson, is not just a great story, right? Rate ourselves, congratulate ourselves on being great, when so often the fact is that it's it's been the work of many to get you there, right? Or to tip you over the edge.
Yeah. And I had a really good mate, Jason Meach, him and I fished a lot together, and he was like extraordinarily good at fishing. And on one of the days, we just had one of the greatest fishing days of our lives. It was the first day of the tournament, actually. And technically, like, he was a far greater fisher. He came second by 60 grams. So I was so delighted, one, to be like, we fished together for years, probably 7 years, I suppose. And I think we were on the podium together maybe once or twice. So to be first and second, and then another really good mate to be third, it was the first time that ever happened. And then because of that, each tournament from that point on for the next few years, I got like a golden ticket. And so I got to travel around China. I got to China twice, and then we went to America and the Netherlands and Amsterdam, and they were extraordinary opportunities. And there was $70,000 US prize money out for grabs when we went to China, which seems quite weird for like a kayak tournament fishing to have so much on the line. And I did an interview, and apparently there's 120 million people watching in Chinese. So it's a big audience over there.
Wow. But you just go viral just being interviewed. It's amazing.
And it was kind of funny. It was when I was on that, I was watching, they were interviewing a heap of people, and everyone was just talking normally. And I was about 20th in the line, and I went, I'm going to do something just a little bit left of center, and just because they're doing this to get it online. Like, they want people to watch it. And if people are talking another language, which they had to translate anyway. So I did a bit of a Steve Irwin, and the producer jumped up out of his huddle and lost his mind at what I was doing. He was so excited. And then then the cameras were kind of turned on me a little bit more, which I was playing the part for. We were just giggling so hard about beforehand at what was going to happen, and it was, and then to see yourself dubbed in Chinese was a highlight, actually.
Fishing is the number one participatory activity in the world. People are passionate. I've noticed, like, I'm not particularly engaged with that myself, but people, like, they devote their lives to it, right? So having that label, what was that experience like, where you are, in such a passionate sort of subpopulation of the world, but it's massive, right? Was that like a celebrity experience? What did you learn from that?
No, it wasn't a celebrity experience, although it felt like it, in that I remember after I'd won, I was really proud of myself, because I love my mates that I fish with. They're like really incredible guys. So to be considered the winner of that amongst my mates, it was like an embedded reason that was like they'll hang shit on me as they should all the time about it. But it was kind of that it was like I was embedded into into it. And a lot of people don't take it seriously. But within the fishing fraternity, I would say there would be very rarely anyone outside my small group that would even know that I had won it. And then maybe a little bit when I was on the TV, I had a couple of people say it the week that it was on, and they didn't know me, but they went, "Hey, were you on?" And that was the closest that ever became.
Fishing is a particular, like they often talk about it as having an element of art. What was it? Why is fishing so interesting to you? And what did what did it give you, right, being a good fisherman?
Yeah, look, I think I hear different people talk about it, and I've heard probably the closest person I've heard talk about it, but I haven't done the next, I heard Joe Rogan talk about hunting, and I don't do hunting the way he does it, and I haven't done it for a long time, but when I was younger, I used to, and he talks about bow hunting, and he talks about how much he loves fishing, but it doesn't compare. There's something in outwitting a live animal. I'm a very big advocate of catch and release, so probably 95% of the fish I'd say 99% of the fish I catch, I let go. Unless I'm wanting to have a feed on the weekend, I went out and we got some flathead and stuff, but we caught a fair bit of fish, but we let go nearly all of them. I think it's the excitement of out-maneuvering something that's alive, then using very light line to catch them and get them in, and then to let them go and let them swim off. I don't know. That's just, I was talking to my partner about it as we were pulling up to the boat ramp, how excited I still get, and I'm 51. That just anticipation is, I don't know. It's a hard thing to describe. I'm not 100% sure, but I do enjoy that excitement of getting a bite and winding it in is exhilarating.
Would you, and we develop coping strategies, like we successfully navigate every bad day we've ever had. So, because we're here. And, some of those things that were, that you were carrying from childhood. Was fishing a therapy as well as a pastime?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I would say that it was a double-edged sword in a way. One is you kind of might go out and you're fishing and you're like, I should be working.
Yeah.
and then it's like, well, or I should be spending time with family or bits and pieces. So once you can kind of, or you're thinking about work and you're like, well, I'm out here fishing. Should I be thinking about work? So I'm no longer married, but while I was married, I used to do a lot of tournaments, and I didn't find out till later that my ex-wife had said that she was quite resentful about me doing it, and I didn't realize. And because I'd worked from home and I did a lot of managing the kids and cooking dinner, and I was home a lot of the time, which was probably not a good thing either, but my business was able that I was from home, took the kids to school, pick them up as best I could. And so when I would go away, I might be away for 3 or 4 days, every 8 weeks or something, let's just say it like that. But I was home way more than if I'd had I had a full-time job and had really good business and stuff like that. But I felt like I was there so often, it felt like it almost needed to be away a little bit. But I looking back on it, I think it was an escape to not face probably certain things that I might have needed to address. So I think it was a bit of a double-edged sword. It was, I loved getting away with the boys. Felt like it was so amazing that I couldn't. And the fact that we had comps, it was kind of like an organized boys weekend, so that you go, hey, if you can make it, it's going to be on here, and we're going to do it. And they were done all around Australia. So it was, and you would travel often a day in the car and with mates, and so yeah, it was good.
So it was a huge investment in your life, that you made into this activity. That like you mentioned the organized boys camp and so on, and Joe Rogan talks about hunting and fishing all the time, and he gets other blokes on and they swap stories about, and there's this sense of masculinity that's around it. And yet, like you just said, it's almost like a two-edged approach. It's healthy and it's real, but, allowing it to dictate who you are and, where you are, almost doesn't serve that as well, right? You have to be more rounded. So how did you feel like it was about being a bloke, right? Did you?
No, it's a really good question. I had some the guys that I would go with, I felt like there was elements of them of being like my soccer coach and my principal. And like when I was going through the breakup of my marriage, those guys were like the bond, like they were there, like, and some of them were better equipped at supporting me in the way I needed to be supported. And then at there were certain times I needed a certain personality to help me. Or when I say help me, probably support me. And then there was others that I needed as I was kind of maybe becoming less stressed. And as I moved through different parts, there was more of a fun element, more of a structure element. And I feel like there was a really good bunch of those that I could be myself amongst them and be okay with it. And then there'd be others I could pretend everything. I could pretend to be someone else as well if I needed to kind of just break from the thing. So yeah,
That's a fascinating insight. So that in that, that sort of dichotomy, right? You have like men, the connection is good and the validation is good and the acceptance is good. The tribe side of things seems to be really good and offering, and being out in nature and active is good. But there's a lack of, like in that conversation you hear on Rogan and that masculinity, the hunting thing and so on, there's also a lot of avoidance and a lot of posturing and competition and, aggression, right? Which is kind of a barrier to that genuine emotional connection. So, did you like it's why, 6 of one and half a dozen of the others?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say there's a couple of mates that, how when you can go through trauma with someone, it could damage the relationship in one way because there's a lot of trauma associated to it. There's a couple of mates that during the darkest of times, I think actually, yeah, one of them was going through something quite similar. And so as he was going through his trauma and I was going through mine, they were maybe 8 weeks apart. We were kind of growing together at the same time. And I think the forged relationship we have is we were different people. We became new people together, not together, but we kind of grew. And so that strength that we have, that bond that we have is extraordinary in comparison to others who, for every reason, had to protect their own self from, like, there's one thing to help a mate, but you don't want that bringing down your life or bringing down, and none of these guys were anything like that. But what I'm saying is someone else who's suffering can then kind of support you in a way that they need supported because they're in a similar thing. But when you go through those things, though, a lot of friendships kind of do fracture a little too, because you used to be a partnership with your wife and then you get invited to less things, and then it just fractures lots of things that just have to be managed.
Yeah. So, the breaking down of, how long do you mind if I ask how long you were married and, like you had?
Yeah, we were married from 99 until 2017, so 18 years. So it would have been our 25th wedding anniversary last November. Like, we do really good co-parenting. I know that's not necessarily always the case, but yeah, we do. We get along really good, way better than we probably ever did when we were together. But we're so probably like good cousins, or like we get along really well, like family members, but not like intimate partners that we ever used to be.
where do you think, like a lot of, relationships, men are struggling with relationships and making them work and then surviving them when they break up. What did you learn out of that whole process that helped you?
I think I'm still learning. Kind of, I don't like confrontation, like in a negative way. And I had, in my mind's eye, imagined, I actually didn't think we'd ever split up. Like, I thought there was times when we could, but I wasn't thinking it was going to happen. But I always looked at other people who were quite harsh and went, if that's the mother of my kids, then I've chosen her for one reason. At one point, I did like her, or whoever it was, and even there was a point in time, like, so that was the thing. So I was like, well, I want my kids, if something was to happen, I'd want to get along with my ex. As it was kind of like, I'm not saying I went into a lot of depth on it, but I had prepared myself for the possibility of what if something happened. Mind you, had I known what was going to happen, I wouldn't have been able to prepare myself for what was like. It was quite very challenging to manage, but one of my close mates, my fishing mate, he says to me, you need to find a north-facing star. That's it. And you focus on that, and that's for the kids. And I felt like that I was bobbling at sea without even an esky, and I was about to drown. It felt like, because I was just so overwhelmed. And I felt like he could rescue me, but he gave me something to hang on to, to go, okay.
A bit of an anchor, a bit of a float. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then there was a bit of a challenge because I wanted to be supportive of, I don't want to go into the details of it, but I want to be supportive of my ex during something she was going through that was also really traumatic for me, but it was for her. I wanted to support the kids as well. And so, but I put myself last. So here I was, like, making sure everyone else is okay. And then I was wasn't giving myself the, because there was pretty much no self-care there. And then there were some people who were very kind to me, and I couldn't accept it because I was still, I'm still just dealing with the grief of what had taken place.
Wow. So, didn't become a doctor, but how did you get, and now you are, self-employed, you've got a business that that takes people into the new world of AI, right? And helps them build their business using some of these tools. And of course, at the moment, there's a lot of noise around AI, a lot of fear, a lot of, potential social upheaval, but also maybe potential opportunity. First of all, how did you end up, walking into a technology world? Right. What was that?
Well, for a while, I had been working in like the review space, helping people with their Google reviews and video testimonials, and I'd help some big brands get some good video testimonials and things like that. And one of the tools I used was using AI, and it was converting the video to text and audio to text. And when OpenAI came out, I'd had this kind of vision that, what if instead of the 200 video testimonials that came in, instead of having to watch all of them for 5 minutes, what if we could identify who the person was and kind of break it down really powerfully as to were they moving towards their goals, away from their goals, just identifying their kind of personality type, and like on the Enneagram and the DISC profile, and then what language did they use, what language didn't they use? Could we identify what country they were from based on the words they used and that? And so I was using OpenAI as playing around, and I would run everything through, and then I thought, I wonder if we can do that. And within a really short period of time, so this is a couple of years ago now, I was able to identify like what state in America they were from based on the language they used. And then there was all these other elements, whether they were male or female. And these were all helpful for the person who was then going to call them back to support them with something. It seems like really basic stuff now, but when I was showing people at the time, they're like, it looked like I was a wizard making it up, because it was doing it instantaneously rather than having to watch the 5 minutes of it. And then it was from that I thought, I realized I'm on the spectrum, and I have always struggled to write an email. Like, it might take me 2 hours to write a basic email. And then when I started using AI, I was like, oh, I can do this in like 20 seconds. Wow. It helped me. And then I was like, well, what if I could do the stuff that I was doing with these testimonials and maybe do that in other ways? So then I created a tool that does that instantly, so that it kind of the quickest and easiest way. Again, that was developed 2 years ago, and now it seems like if anyone listening about AI, it won't seem like that big of a deal, but it's kind of like taking you answering questions about who you are, and then it being your, like, if anyone knows anything about AI, it's like creating a personalized chatbot, but you don't have to do anything to do it. It does it automatically for you. So this 2 years ago was considered, like, most people didn't even think it was, they didn't understand it. So only because they didn't understand it, because it just didn't make sense. How could you talk into one thing and then it come out and it sounds like you in the other way? But now that's what AI does.
Yeah.
I'm quite comfortable.
So, like, was that rewarding, right? So, like you mentioned apologizing to young Scott for maybe his dream of being a doctor and other things, right? And you not fulfilling. But are you able now to, like, because like it sounded like you offered other dreams, right, and achieved other things. Are you, like, is this something that feeds you? Is this a good thing, your career and direction?
Look, it's a really good question. I don't know the full answer, other than I feel like it's a work in progress of acceptance of myself. So, there's certainly what AI has been very beneficial for me is I'm very curious about lots of things, and that can get me in a lot of trouble, because I'll ask questions that people, one, don't want to answer, or two, I'll see the linkage between something, or again, sometimes just like, and I'm not making excuses, but being on the spectrum, sometimes I'm seeking clarification for cohesiveness, but people may think I'm trying to catch them out when I'm actually just wanting to double check. This doesn't make sense to me. And knowing that happens now, I'm less likely to be asking as many questions, because I realize I don't have to tick all the boxes for it to make sense. It just doesn't have to always make sense. But what you're saying is quite weird, because I feel like AI helped me heal significantly, because I could ask it a million questions and I would get the answer. And then if I wanted to learn something, it would teach me. And because I was so curious, so I was learning how to do coding, and like, I didn't even know what JSON code was or Python code. And then I'm getting it to write all this code, and then I'm getting it to do all these things. And I'm just giggling like I'd kind of found the matrix and was capable of lots of things. And then, so the challenge with that though is that then led me to like lots of deep dives on certain things that were really traumatic, as in I was exploring some healing of mine that I would never have asked a human, because I wouldn't have had the courage to do it. But to ask AI in a particular way and then go, hey, tell me how I would feel if this, and this happened. And then for it to reflect back to me, well, you may think this and you may think that. And I'm like, oh, well, why could I feel like this? And why would I feel like that? And it's like, oh, well, because this, and this happened. And then I was like, wow. So can you help me heal that? And it's like, yeah, this is how we go through it. And so I did it with a few other people too. And watching them, I would act as the AI question person. They'd say something and I'd go, okay, da. And then I'd read it and go, oh, that's not it. And then they'd start bawling their eyes out and I go, okay, I know nothing.
Yeah.
I know nothing. And when that happened multiple times, and the joy in their voice of, this is what often people say, I felt heard and seen for the first time. I felt like everything I've gone through has now been for a reason, and I can, like, all these really wonderful things that seemed fairly basic or logical maybe, but the reason I'm not judging is because I was part of that kind of process, so I put myself through.
Wow. I've always been fascinated by the idea of why people are capable of becoming, like kids are capable of being attached and finding safety in things like teddy bears, right? And yet, so we know almost that person-to-person connection is irreplaceable. But is it, are there forms of, can we go and can AI be a teddy bear for us in many things, right? That are, that's acceptable. Like, is it a disaster that AI takes on some of the human roles?
Look, I would say there's, like anything, like with matches. Matches are good for lighting a fire to keep you warm and cook your food, but they can also burn your house down if out of context. And I personally, I haven't had AI burn. There's been certain times it said things I didn't want to hear or didn't want to see, and but it was well worth what it said that I needed to hear. So there was some singes, like getting my hand too close to the flame, but technically it was, I could only smell the hair burning. There was no, you know what I mean? I really feel, well, just from my own experience and a few other people, if done the right way, and mental health is a challenging component. There's so many factors that need to be taken into account. But with the right parameters, I think the teddy bear component, or even I'm sure you're familiar with the voice activated AI. Sometimes I might say something like, "Hey, I'm having a shit day. Can you just give me a perk me up?" And it'll say something. Often it'll be just like, and I'll be like, no, you know what I need to hear. Don't say what sounds good, say what I really need to hear. And it'll say something, and I'm like, it was kind of not a love letter that I would like to write myself, but it was not far off it. And this kind of comes back to an exercise from years ago. Someone said, is like, write yourself a love letter, because realistically, no one's ever going to write you the love letter that you want, because they don't get to know you. But I felt like AI was as close to writing as good enough love letter for me with the info I'd given it than anyone I'd ever met. So I would say, with the advances with what's happening, I would say it could be incredibly helpful for people under different mental health challenges, and supporting them. I have heard from anecdotal, like other evidence from even people buying and selling things. They're much more inclined to tell the AI salesperson more info than they are another person, and even more accurate information as well.
Yeah. It's an amazing insight. Like, I love what you've offered. Given that, the complexity of the world has increasing the ambiguity, VUCO, the complexity, the ambiguity, the lack of connection. A lot of the lifting in the future, the systems are overloaded, right, responding to the needs of the community. A lot of the lifting might have to be done by some form of automation or connection. And but I worry, there's a lot of intrinsic fear about that, right? And you're like, so how, do you think it's possible to build safe AI to take on some of those roles?
Look, I was talking to someone in a I think someone we both know that runs a very big, I'll just say it's a well-known brand name that people call on a regular basis. And we were talking about it. I think to start with, most people are going to be kind of pushing back against it. And I think there needs to be a lot of human mechanisms in place to, because there is undoubtedly, no matter what happens, someone will slip through and it'll come back that it was an AI error or something like that. And and just thinking out loud, part of it is like let's say, for instance, there was 100 people waiting on a helpline, and because they didn't get help because there was nobody to talk to, they missed out. But if all of them were listened to, and there was an error rate quite small, I think there will be one day something that would be kind of like your own virtual assistant on the phone that will pick. I'd say it exists. It'll know you so well that if you are, let's say, for instance, I'll talk about myself. You're on the spectrum, and it'll go, hey, so it seems like your energy level's a little bit low. And my mates and I, often guys don't want to tell you, this is kind of related, but often guys won't tell you when they're having a tough time.
No.
Or they might, like I had a mate keep saying, hey, we should catch up for coffee. Do you want to catch up for coffee? And I'm like, yeah, I can. When do you want to catch up? And he goes, oh, it seems like you want to catch up for coffee. And I'm like, no, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And he kept going. And then I realized afterwards he was desperate to catch up for coffee.
Yeah. But he could, very difficult admitting that he needed to chat to someone. Yeah.
And then when he did, he was like almost crying with joy. And I was like, gosh, God, how could, that it was like I was missing, was almost, but this is kind of what I would say to one of my mates, or maybe a couple, is if I don't like drinking beer, but if I said, let's have a beer, that was like code word for, I really want you to not ask me any questions. I'm in a bad space. Can we have a chat type thing? Well, even just putting that in place was really, felt like, okay, cool. I've got someone now. I can have that.
Those data points that AI can capture, right? You know,
yeah,
and can inform people, because sometimes we're just not paying attention.
That's what I was going to say when it came back to the AI. It's like it might say, "Hey, are you wanting? Is it one of those I want a beer moments? Is it like?" And I'll talk again about myself. Sometimes when you're wanting support or whatever, you don't want to ask for help. You don't want to have to explain yourself, or there might be all these different elements that come into play. And it sounds like I might be like, what I'm trying to say is that if I believe AI will be able to pick up on those things, and instead of you maybe going spiraling, and I'll say again, talk about myself, instead of say going thinking of things and then going, it'll go, hey, do you know this is, don't forget this and don't forget that. And again, and I also believe it'll be incredibly valuable for going to next levels of like self-awareness and self-conscious, and even awakening in spirituality and all those types of things. I think there's a lot of things that you can ask that if you can explore those types of knowledge things without having to sign up to be a part of a group or anything like that. You could just,
it's interesting because, you know, AI, like as a series of data points, like, you know, essentially we're broken down into those, you know, ones and zeros, right? But in there, can AI help us find our soul as well as our awareness?
well, I think with the right questions, and one of the first questions I think I ever asked AI was something along those lines. It was something really, and it came back with something like, no, that doesn't exist, this, and this. And I was like, I'm never using AI again. It was almost like, and then I went, well, maybe I'll ask it a different way. And I realized that whoever makes the AI makes the rules and lets you talk about things that they do or don't believe in or whatever. But the experience I had was, okay, so this, and this happened in my life, and this, and this happened in my life. Describe to me my parents, what my parents would have been. And when it described them to so precisely, I just went, oh, I'm a commodity of certain events that have taken place. And then I was like, all right, let's dial it in and say, tell me the type of person I would have married. Almost verbatim, like was. And I said, tell me what the parents of the person I'd married, what their jobs would be. And it said engineer and in the health service. And it was an engineer and a nurse. So it was right. It then described, I said, describe their relationship. It described it in such a way that when I told my ex-wife, she was stunned because of how accurate it was. And then I was like, wow, look at what it actually, it was as if it was writing our biology of our family, but it was basing it on our personalities or our emotions and
a
our
series of points that it knew it valued and rated and prioritized in an algorithm, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was so accurate about my upbringing, and it was so accurate about my, I found out things about my upbringing that I didn't know existed until AI told me. And then I asked my auntie and uncle, and they told me it was true.
Confirmed it.
They confirmed it.
Wow.
Which is crazy.
Well, what we're talking here is magic, right? Right. And I love that, because so often technology, like there's the great famous quote, technology to a middle-aged person, is indecipherable from magic, right? And in some ways, like I'm listening to that and it's magic, right? So are you a wizard? Is that how you manage to introduce and to promote and sort of develop the business, the commercial, and the community aspect of AI? Because you list yourself as an alchemist, which is like basically sort of some form of wizardry, is that?
Look, I'm a huge fan of alchemy. As you know, I have loved reading about it and the whole process of, and I can't remember it off the top of my head the way they used to do it in the day, but it's all alchemy's also a process, also kind of like with ideas and things, and it's going to that innocence that we can be in and tapping into the potential of what's going on. And then the pressure that we feel is the pressure for that's what helps us get from one space to the other. It's like the wind in the sails type of thing. And it's interesting you say, like I'm trying to reflect back on the wizard part, in that I think it's more I've seen the world very differently for a long time, and I felt like AI normalized life for me in a way that I hadn't been able to articulate it. And I learning, if I loved it and it was drawing and it was things that I could understand, it was amazing. But even though I didn't understand it, I would have to try and I didn't realize that I couldn't read, or that I had dyslexia. And so I would read a whole page, couldn't remember it, read a whole page, couldn't remember it. So then what I would do is I would interview all the kids that had read the book, and I'd write down all the notes on what they thought of each character. And then I would write my own review, but it was based on my interview of the other people. But because then they failed me with English because they said, "Oh, well, you were cheating because you didn't read." And it was heartbreaking because I didn't tell anyone that I couldn't remember what I was doing. So that frustration led to trying to figure out problems that, and I found out recently I'm really good at reverse engineering, which upsets a lot of people because I'm talking about it from the end backwards and most people talk from the other way. And when I say upsets a lot of people, when I'm trying to get my point across, I'm bringing it down the opposite way, and I've realized that can have an impact on help people understanding what I'm saying. And I used to think I was not smart, as opposed to just doing it a different way. So AI's helped me come to terms with I'm probably smarter than I'd given myself credit for, but only because I do things differently.
Well, neurodivergence is the intelligence in non-standard areas.
Yeah, but when there's a kind of if the majority of your life and the majority of the people you interact with and you're trying to share ideas with think non-neurodiverse,
neurotypical,
yeah, and you don't have the self validation that I didn't have, then you start questioning your own. Like, I'm not putting this on anybody else. It was my inability to see the value in what I was doing as being valuable, and so therefore I wouldn't push my. I wasn't strong enough in my own essence to kind of put my ideas out as strong and as good as they were. They weren't, and I couldn't articulate them in a way that people would understand them.
Yeah.
But you live and learn.
It's interesting you talk about it. We know, like, research tells us that the neurodiverse child will have heard negative feedback or instances of negative feedback. So 10,000 more statements of negative feedback than a neurotypical child by the age of 10. So for every year of their life, they've heard 1,000 more, on average, 1,000 more times where they've been negatively, fed back on or criticized. Right?
Yeah, which is interesting because I loved learning. When I had a teacher that understood my love of learning, I blossomed. When they didn't, I failed. Like I went from, say, straight A pluses to failure, which isn't necessarily an accurate assessment of the skill set. As I know I bothered people, and I know I got sacked from one job because I was told I was too enthusiastic, and I know that the enthusiasm can sometimes come across as being annoying, but that was not. Sometimes it was me not being able to read the room. It's like, well, actually, I lost 2 jobs for being too enthusiastic. I used to run to lunch breaks on a particular job, and they said the union, if they see you, you're out, and you can't risk it, so you got to go. And I'm like, what? Well, I run into my break, like I want to get the job done, and they're like, no, you need to walk. It was a wake up call, and I'm sure there was other reasons too, but certainly primary school, I was always asking for extra projects. Like I was like wanting to always do more projects. It's like, yeah, I've done that. What else can I do? I never saw that as being smart, and it necessarily wasn't that smart. It was just, I always wanted to do extra projects on FileApp and so Kingsford Smith. So I was just fascinated with those two entities. And so, yeah.
I'm sure AI would have an amazing conclusion to draw from your interest in those those particular icons, right? So,
well, it's funny. It's funny because it's from those struggles I'm helping my kids now. Like at the moment, one of my sons he's gone into year 12, and last year he was struggling studying law and biology, and I don't know if he's on the spectrum or not. He might be, but he's pretty much straight A student, but he's fascinated with just following the law and rules and doing it the right way and getting really good marks. And he wants to understand it as well as learn it. And he wasn't understanding the law component. So I just said, what's your favorite game? And he told me, say it was SimCity. I said, pretend all the characters are in SimCity match all the people within the Australian legal system so that he can have a correlation between the two. And within about 15 minutes, he goes, I completely understand it, Dad. And he went off to school and got one of the best marks he got for the year. But it was that help of the correlation between the two. And then he was doing biology on stuff I knew nothing about. And I said, hey, can you match it to helping him understand with, what's it called? Fortnite. Anyhow, as it did, it was teaching him how to build, how the chemicals build, and that's how they were related to this thing in Fortnite. And he goes, oh, yeah, no. And so he didn't blitz it in biology, but it was the blocks to assist when he solved all the problems. It was so amazing. It was like took my idea and put it on a whole new scale. So.
It's so like I feel like we could go on for hours. There's so much. When I speak to you, I am so encouraged and inspired. Right? I'm actually excited about something that I'm often worried about in a different way. Right. So for that, you are a wizard, right? You've performed some magic transformation on me, which has given me quite a lot. I'm quite excited about the prospects of working with AI and finding a way, particularly say neurodivergence, the sense of being supported and the possibilities around building something that is an adjunct, an assistance to people who have no support, right? It's a step in the right direction, right? If we can get them to engage with some level of confirmation and the teddy bear effect or whatever. So I'm very, very grateful, both fascinated by your story and what you've shared with us today. Also grateful that you're continuing to bring this to the world, mate. So nothing to apologize for that, mate. It's an awesome prospect you're taking to the world, and good luck with it all, mate.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing today. Thank you for wandering down some tough paths, and I really appreciate that, mate. And the Kintsugi Heroes listeners will also appreciate it. We're very grateful to have you on. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Kintsugi Heroes. Thank you to Colin Lilly for permission to use Broken as our theme music for this series. If you enjoyed this conversation, share the podcast with a friend and let us know by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support Kintsugi Heroes and the stories we share, head to kintsugiheroes.com.au and follow the instructions to make a tax-deductible donation. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.